All right, the next section, Chapter 2, Section 8, we're doing a lot of the same stuff. We're still graphing absolute values, but instead of graphing equations, we're now going to graph inequalities. Okay, and if you remember, we've graphed inequalities before, but they were in 2 dimensions, meaning there was only 1 variable and not 2. Now we're graphing inequalities with 2 variables, and they're going to be absolute value inequalities. If you remember, inequalities are anything that means not equal. So like less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, or the symbol not equal to. Okay? Now, the only thing that's going to change are the boundary lines, and you're also going to have to add your shading. You're going to have to shade the graph above or below. So let's talk about the boundary lines first. The boundary lines stand for whether the actual graph is included in the solution set or if it's not. Okay, so if you look at this, a boundary line, a solid or dotted line where shading starts and stops. If it's a solid line, this means that the values on the line are possible solutions. That means that the symbols less than or equal to or greater than or equal to are being used in the actual equation or the inequality. If it's a dotted line, that means the values that make the line are not solutions. Okay, do you guys remember when we did 1 dimension, we had an open dot and we had a closed dot? Same thing is true for solid line, dotted line. Solid line means it is included. Dotted line means it's not. Okay, so dotted line would be things like less than or greater than. Okay, now after we determine if the line is solid or dotted, okay, we're going to decide about the shading. Shading means, is it greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to? And it's very common knowledge. If you think of something greater than, you think of shading it above. Okay, if you think of something less than or equal to, you try to shade it below. So we're thinking about these V's that we have. Okay, so if it's greater than, we're going to shade above the V or on the inside of the V. If it's a regular V, if it's upside down, you're going to shade on the outside or below. Does that make sense? So let's do an example. Graph the following absolute value inequality. Well, the first thing you have to do is, just like you did yesterday, decide your A value and your vertex. For this one, my A value is -2, which tells me it's going to be an upside down V with a slope of 2. My vertex, remember on the inside of the absolute values, you have to think opposite, so it's going to be -1, -1. To graph that, I'm going to start at -1, -1. And then I'm going to go down to over 1, both ways. Now, yesterday we just connected the dots and we moved on. Today we have to decide 2 more things. Number 1, is it a solid line or a dotted line? And based on the less than symbol, we decided today that it's going to be a dotted line. So when I graph this, I'm not going to make a solid line. I'm going to actually draw a dotted line. And then I also have to decide my shading. Okay? Y is less than -2 times the absolute value of x plus 1 minus 1. So that means I'm going to shade below. So if I look at this graph, below would be on the inside of the V. So you're going to shade in here. Now, this one is a little bit more tricky just because you're doing opposite. Instead of being given an equation or an inequality, they give you the graph and you have to write the inequality. Okay? So I have to think of the standard form of the inequality as just y equals a times x minus h plus k. And I have to fill in the a, the h, and the k by looking at the graph. And for these, since they're inequalities, we're going to replace the equal sign with something. So let's look at the graph over here. First thing I want to find out is what is the vertex? So 2, 3, 0. And there's my H and my K. 3 and 0. This one's the part that's a little trickier because the points are kind of hard to see. So I know that this is 3, 0. The next point that I can see, it would probably be this one. So I'll use a different color. So I'm going to go up 2 over 2, 4, 5. So this distance right here is 2, and this distance over here is 5. Because each line equals 2. Okay, so 2/5. Now, what symbol am I going to use to fill it in? Well, it's a dotted line, so that means it has to be greater than or less than. And I'm shading below. Shading below just means it has to be less than. Now, if you don't have the plus 0, that's okay. So it would be y is less than 2/5 times the absolute value of x minus 3.